For my entire adult life, I and everybody my age have lived a life of deceit and fraud, delusion. The world is upside down. So that's the theme of this little conversation. Nothing you have been told is true. Nothing.
You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth.
So let's talk a little bit about what might not be true. A year and a half ago, I made a play with the allegedly independently operated White House that was seeking real information, real sources of choice by voters, by the electorate, okay? And I gave credence to the possibility that someone would pay attention and that there would be at least an honorable way of approaching the process. So at the time I had 30 or 40 or 50,000 subscribers. I had many more views. I did a move to a petition with the White House to end the Fed, the Federal Reserve, and I filed a petition, and then I set up a website, and then I asked people to sign up. And I think and the requisite was that the president might respond to this, which has never been the case, if there were 100,000 signatures on the petition. Of course, there was no necessarily validation of who signed the petition, or in fact, even if people did. But eventually, out of the 30,000 subscribers I had, and the 100,000 or so people who looked at my videos, I got 12,000 signatures, which would tell you either that people are terribly timid or they don't agree with most of what they listen to, or that the results, the outcome was being stifled, which may have been the truth. How would I know? So what I would like to say to you is that nothing that has to do with our federal government, nothing that has to do with the United States, nothing that has to do with our financial or monetary system, nothing that has to do with the operations in Washington, D.C. is the truth. And what I have said to you in other videos is it is all a giant psyop, right? So despite that, a majority of the alt channels, for lack of a better term, and many of the people that come to my videos, and I have no idea how many that really is, are sure that there is a blue-red paradigm, that somewhere the blue is worse than the red, or that we would be better, that we're better off with Trump than we are with Hillary, which may in fact be the case, or that the parties that are playing games in Congress are polarized in a way that one of the sides is speaking more for us than the other side. And I'm going to tell you, if that's true, it is true in a very de minimis and controlled fashion, okay? Mitch McConnell, the head of the Senate on the Republican side, is controlled opposition. And he has no intention of following the conservative Republican guidelines and principles that Republicans vote on and vote him in time after time after time. Nor does he have any intention of following through on anything that President Trump says he wants to do. And evidence of that is that nothing they have done, nothing they did in the first 2 years when they had a majority, nothing that they have done since 2018 when they got supposedly a bigger majority, has gone toward financing improving the wall, for instance, getting authorization to change or modify the way that children and adults are being held here, modifying or going after the asylum seekers and changing that. Nothing that has been done with respect to filing petitions to change the way sanctuary cities operate or to take away their funding in any respect. Traffic, police, welfare benefits, anything else. Nothing. Subsidized housing. There have been no constraints put on sanctuary cities, despite the fact that they are openly and blatantly violating the law. And they are destroying the capacity of the federal government to do its number one task, which is to guard the borders and protect us from alien invasions, right? Of all kinds. So when we have an alien invasion of 800,000 asylum seekers who have borrowed kids from other families and brought them into the community, do we follow them? No. Do we hold them? No. Do we keep them in camps? No. Do we process them? No. Have we employed 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 times more judicial hearings officers to take care of them before they get dispersed throughout the country? No. No, they're held for 72 hours. They're loaded onto Greyhound buses. I watched this in Deming, New Mexico, and they are dispersed throughout the country. They allegedly have 30 days in which to notify the courts that they are there and that they are ready to be processed for their asylum seeking status. They have 30 days to do that. And something like 95% of them do not. And President Trump has so noted. Has that changed anything? No. Do we move to deport them once we've gotten past the 31st day? No, none of the above. Are the walls being secured? Well, people tell me, oh, well, the walls are being built. Yeah, they're building walls, but at least to the last report I got, the walls that are being built where there were pedestrian barriers, and the pedestrian barrier was a 1.5 foot tall piece of steel mounted on legs every so far that could keep a car out if a car was trying to go directly across, but they don't stop the pedestrians. So now they're putting 18-foot walls up in those segments. Are they fixing where the barbed wire is? No. Are they fixing where there are huge holes? No. Are they fixing where there is no barrier at all? No. Are there hundreds of miles where people can drive right across our border and with no impediment at all? Yes. Are there places, huge places, where they're not even cameras? Yes. Is there anybody that's policing or parading with helicopters to check? Well, once or twice a day somebody flies by in the daytime. Is there anybody doing that at night? No. And so what the Border Patrol told me was that they're not capturing more than about 10% of them that are not asylum seekers, that the ones that are not going across and claiming the right to be here out of seeking asylum. So all of this is a facade, and all of it's not true. And the bigger problem is the Federal Reserve, because that's the dragon, as I have called it, that is at the base of all the snakes. So let's take a look at some of the other stuff that's not true. I'm going to say to you, and this is a very difficult thing to say, because I know many of you are certain that even if the whole world turns upside down, there's the rapture, and the rapture is going to come and it's going to fix us. And I'm going to say to you that the rapture is not coming, okay? There is going to be no rapture, at least not as one envisions it. Why do I say that? Well, because the rapture is an invention of the last 100 or 150 years. It was not part of Christianity 2,000 years ago or 1,500 years ago or even 500 years ago. The 6,000-year-old earth was not part of it, not part of the original one. So what part of the Bible is maybe not true? Boy, I know. I'm stepping on tender feet here. But I want to tell you that if you're not questioning everything that's in your life, from top to bottom, you're going to miss the heart of the real reason we're here, which is to know why we're here and who we are and what it is that we're doing on this planet, who we really are as spirits, not as Joe Blow or Little Froggy or whatever. What are we really doing as spirits? So what is not true about the common Western Judeo-Christian process? And I'm going to say to you that the Old Testament is not true. And in a huge way. So at the outset of Genesis, let me just give you the pieces. At the outset of Genesis, there is this comment that in the beginning God created the earth, or created the universe, and did so with the Word, right? In the beginning there was the Word, and then there was light. And I think that's true. I don't disagree with that. That's God the Creator. And then we have this alleged God that becomes a mono-God, that is the God that is working in fine ways to benefit and protect the 12 tribes of Israel. And I'm going to tell you that that's not the Creator. It's not the same person. So in the very best of circumstances, that identity, that entity, is a beneficent entity that represents the Creator in some fashion, which does not make it a mono God, right? I mean, forget the Trinity. It does not make it a mono God. But what is more than that, we have in the Old Testament a dark and devious bad actor that is punishing people, that is causing fear, that is threatening, that is granting covenants and removing covenants, that is killing off tens and thousands, and in some cases hundreds of thousands of people for the benefit of the tribes, that is dropping locusts and all kinds of crazy things. It is not the God, the Creator, that is the beneficent goodness that created this earth and the universe, nor is it the God that Jesus talks about. Not at all, okay? But what is more than that, the question then is, from whence does that come? And when we start to take a look at where the source of this Old Testament God, the post-creator God, where does that entity come? From where does it come? And what I will say to you is, if you look at, and I'm going to give you chunks of this, if you take a look at Irving Finkel, who is a curator or in some capacity at the British Museum, in a very funny and playful way, he is going to tell you what we know about Genesis, what we know about Noah, what we know about Eden, what we know about the oral history that came with the Israelites post-Babylonia, post-Abraham leaving Ur, his birthplace, and 1,000 years or so later being translated into parts of the Old Testament, okay? What is it that goes on there, and how does that match up with the Sumerian tablets, which is what Irving Finkel is going to share with you, of thousands of years earlier, which is the exact same story. So the Noah's Ark doesn't look like the Noah's Ark of the cartoons with giraffes hanging out and the rest of that. It's an open, round, deep dish bowl that is as is described in the original Sumerian tablets. The flood does not last 40 days, which is in the Old Testament. It lasts for 6. The remnants of the flood do not remain for, I think, what is it in the Old Testament, 11 or 13 months. It lasts for 5 or 6 weeks, according to the Sumerian tablets. That makes a great deal more sense, because as I have calculated, what does it take to put 10,000 feet of water atop the earth's surfaces, which is what the Old Testament claims, that Mount Ararat, which I think is at 13,000 feet, I didn't even go that far, that it was inundated with water, and that it was inundated with water for many days, and it was not until the water receded that they were able to have the dove go and not come back, and that they were able to begin to settle back into the earth out of the ark. What I'm going to say to you, because I've done the calculations, is that if you put that amount of water on top of the continents, it's going to take something like 25 or 30% of the water of the oceans, of the entire, all of the surface water in the world. It takes something like 30 or 35% of that to go on top of the Earth's surfaces to raise it to the level of 10,000 feet, which means that in order to hold that, it would take an immense readjustment of water. And I have read many of the books that talk about the catastrophe that happened, and now we know that it probably happened 12,005 years ago. There are guys like Graham Hancock that believe that it happened from a meteorite. I'm going to tell you that cannot be true. And why do I say that? Because you put a meteorite any place you want to on the earth, even in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and create waves that would be gigantic, 10,000, 15,000 feet. Wrap them around the earth and see what happens to them. As they hit the barrier of the continents, they begin to dissipate, and they will dissipate in every direction. Nor can it be done in some other minor fashion. As I see it, and this is another myth, right? This is one of the myths, is that there are only really two possibilities: to put that amount of water on top of the Earth's surfaces and to have it to apply worldwide, which is, we have reports from Peru and Indonesia and from the Pyrenees and from all across Europe and, of course, the Middle East, saying that there was this giant flood. This is not a localized Mediterranean that suddenly had ice break or something like that. We're talking about a worldwide flood. There are only two possibilities, as I see it, that would move that amount of water. And one of them is that a huge object, that is something that is 100 times or 1,000 times bigger than the moon, came within proximity of the earth, and as a result created tides which would have raised the water on the oceans and brought it, instead of having 12-foot tides or 20-foot tides as we sometimes have with the moon, there would have been tides of thousands and thousands of feet high, and they would have bulged out and covered many of the Earth's surfaces. That's a possibility. The second one is, and this is one that I have pointed you to, which is Doug Voigt, and it is, I'm trying to think what the name of his website is. I'll put it on this thing, is that the Earth, in a process of reversing polarity, the Earth reverses its direction. So when the poles flip, the Earth likewise stops, and he claims it stops within 8 or 10 hours and then goes the other direction. And when it does, the static motion, the vectoring of that weight of water that has the earth crust flipping under it, causes the oceans to go over the top of the continents. And that would likewise, if it were violent and quick enough, would cause for several days the oceans to go up over, as the water was getting accustomed to being reversed. Just as if you took a bucket and you swung it one way and then stopped it, it's going to splash at the end of where it is, and then as you bring it back the opposite direction, it is going to take some time before it comes back to stasis. So if you don't believe in flat Earth, then you have to believe that nothing that has happened as it relates to the Earth, it fits the definitions that we have, okay? So what about the New Testament? The New Testament was pieced together, and of course the Dan Brown Da Vinci Code has a whole bunch of incorrect comments about it, and if you want to find out what really happened as it relates to the Dan Brown Da Vinci Code relationship matter, take a look at Bart Ehrman. And Bart Ehrman is a professor in, I think, North or South Carolina, and has done extensive work on the historical aspect, the historicity of Jesus and the early times there. And what you'll learn is that there were, in fact, many changes and modifications to the New Testament Bible, both as relates to the Gospels, to the content of the Gospels, to the translation of the Gospels, to the transcription of the Gospels, and that there are, in fact, probably more modifications and alterations, some of them innocent, some of them just a letter or two or a line or two, but many of them of more consequence, that there are more of them than we have original transcripts. So that the biblical source that we got for those few gospel chapters that comes out of the New Testament, the many of which are not included in it and the some that are included in it have been all modified. So when someone says to me that that the Bible, Old Testament and New, is the inerrant Word of God, I have to say, which one is? Is it the Schofield Bible? Is it the modern ones? Is it the King James Version? Or is it the early ones that came from the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd century? Which transcription would you take? Which language is it in Greek? Is it in Latin? Is it in some other language? And Greek was the language that it was. And is it accurate? You know, the people that don't understand this, that are not willing to look at this, and I'm going to give you a linkage here to Billy Carson, who basically hammers down on what we know and what we don't know, is that there have been huge changes and modifications in what we were told. And much of that is not true. It's just simply not true. So what I'm going to attempt to do is give you some linkages, and you'll see those in my notes directly below this video on YouTube. You're going to see linkage to a bunch of things with relation to the Federal Reserve, possibly to the Rothschilds themselves, to our existence, to Billy Carson, and to others, that is going to say to you, at least think about what's real. Think about the fact that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. That is, that we are here in this holographic universe, and that the lessons that we are to get is who we really are and how to spiritually advance the process of who we are here, and that all of the rest of the things, even the things that I have ranted about, are largely inconsequential to our journey. So, do I want to fix the earth? Yes. Do I want to remove the Fed? Yes. Would I like to have our borders secure? Yes. Would I like to get rid of 400 or 531 of the 535 people in Congress and 10,000 people that are SES or whatever the number is, and dump the whole thing? Of course. Would I like Washington, D.C. to be basically leveled, preferably with most of the people that work there in it, and move to Omaha, Nebraska, and be required to never grow above a certain level, or Poughkeepsie, Illinois, or Denver, Colorado? Nah, Denver's too far away already. Yeah, I would. That doesn't mean I want anybody to bomb DC, okay? I wasn't making that comment. This is not sedition, but it is a comment about really what is there. Thomas Jefferson said to us that if we allow the bankers to run the world, then we will end up destitute. And that's where we're headed right now. We're headed toward ending destitute. But what's the bigger picture? The bigger picture is that I, as a spirit, even if the world turns into an enslaved encampment, I have, as a spirit, have the duty to render myself more elevated as a spirit. Do what I can on earth to make it better. Do what I can for my fellow man. Do what I can for my family. Do what I can for my personal physical well-being. But walk the path of spiritual elevation through the whole process, okay? So some of you who are going to say, well, the world's really only 6,000 years old, and the Bible is in the inerrant Word of God, and this guy is actually dark, and he's teaching bad things, I will say to you that is exactly not true. We are here. We are all here for the spiritual elevation of our own souls, okay? That's why we're here. And that is the penultimate obligation that we have, is to seek higher ground. What Jesus gave us, the reports that we got in the New Testament about conducting our lives, living for the benefit of others, being of service to others, treating our fellow people as ourselves, embracing all of us in love, and not being dark and evil and the rest of that is all true. It's all true. It's just that the trappings for what is around it are not necessarily true, okay? The trappings, the religious trappings for all of our major religions, certainly for the so-called Judeo-Christian ones, the ones that came out of Jerusalem, the Jewish faith, the Christian faith, and the Muslim faith, are all so warped and so manipulated that you cannot take them lock, stock, and barrel and spiritually elevate it to any great extent. I mean, are there a few people who find their spiritual path inside of there? Of course. Are there people who become illuminated, not in the dark way, but become elevated in their spiritual path through those processes? Of course. But they take the best of what is there and they leave the rest, and they do not follow the darkness that is the dogmatic part of the religion that has formed out of the higher spiritual messages that we are given. So everything is upside down. And perhaps in the following comments, I will, as the weeks progress, I will take pieces of this and show why it cannot be true as it has been reported to us. So what I tried to do here was to give some obvious ones and to draw upon what it is that I have shared and what it is that I have questioned and challenged over the last couple years. But to a far greater extent, what I want to say to you is nothing is true. If you have people that are elevated to the status by the mainstream media, and most of you know this, the mainstream media does not tell the truth. How long has that been the case? I'm going to tell you for several hundred years, if not thousands. If not, the Bible is part of it. And what I'm going to say to you is the heroes of the historians, of the PhDs and the rest of that. Let me give you a single example. FDR. And I'll do this as a closing. FDR is elevated as one of the top 3 presidents we've ever had. He is the great man. He was the one that winnowed us through the Great Depression and the Great War of World War II, and and he provided the social welfare underpinnings and the webbing and the netting that provided us Social Security and the modern structures of government. BS. It's all BS. First of all, he actively participated in keeping us depressed after the 29 crash. And when he took over in 33, he did not fix the things that allegedly the evil and stupid Herbert Hoover supposedly said in that caused the depression. That's false as well. And he did not change the tariffs. He did not improve the money supply. He did not modify pro-business. He didn't change the tax rolls. He actually increased tax numerous times. He devalued the money, which basically impoverished people across the board, devalued our dollars 42%, and reduced the buying power of the common middle class person. He took away the gold and gave us, $23 for it, us, that is the populace, and then immediately set the standard at 35, thereby stealing 40% of it. Sometime in 38 or 39, the Secretary of the Treasury came in and said, you know, we've had a second recession in 1937. Our process and plan is obviously not working. And to which Roosevelt said, I'm not sure I'm ready to have us come out of the recession yet. The implications of that were, I need the social welfare system to be fully in place before I lift my thumb from the common populace of the United States. In other words, he was working for the Fed from the outset. And the fakeness, as pointed out by Wayne Jett, of the 1929 crash was, it was like the 13 or 15 crash that was created by Nathan Rothschild at the culmination of the Napoleonic Wars at Waterloo, and he created a false recession, a false depression, and sold and then bought, and increased and multiplied their earnings by tens or 20s or 50 times. They did the same thing in 1929, and they did it happily with millions of people standing in soup lines and migrating across the Dust Bowl of the United States. They did the same thing in 2008, and Roosevelt was involved in the one in 29 and kept his thumb from 1933 till 1941, kept his thumb on our economy to keep the welfare system, to build the welfare system as he went. So he's not a hero of getting us through the recession. The second piece is he a hero then as it relates to World War II? And I'm going to tell you, as I have shared with you, and if you take a look back at my videos, I will tell you both with respect to Pearl Harbor, he was the one that was harboring us getting into the war against Japan. They had an 8-point plan to corner Japan and make it as diabolical as they could, to take away, with the Dutch, to take away all of Japan's oil, and they're an oil-dependent nation, to force them to either succumb to the pressures of the United States or to strike back, which is what they did. And he knew, FDR knew, that they had rounded up the ships, the Japanese ships, on November 30th. He knew that they were coming to Pearl Harbor. They ordered both the admiral and the general to stand down effectively. They did not give them the ongoing and concurrent translations, either of the transmissions between the ships and the plans that Japan had, or the spy that was in Japan that was setting them up and describing where all the battleships and the rest of that were. They sent the aircraft carriers out of Pearl Harbor and left the World War I battleships there so that they could make it look as bad as possible without losing our aircraft carriers. Franklin Roosevelt set up the Japanese war, set up the entrance to World War II. Well, what about Europe? Well, we were doing Lend-Lease, and we were giving the Brits and the French aid and benefits through the process, and we knew that sooner or later it was going to polarize us into the Second World War. What is more, before the election of 1940, Roosevelt promised that he would not send our boys into a foreign war. Immediately after December 7th, 1941, he said, well, I'm not sending our boys into a foreign war. It's not a foreign war anymore. We're involved. We've had war declared against us. So now it's our war, and now we can send our boys. So it was a deception from the outset that he knew. How do I know that? Well, because in 39 or so, when the Germans were challenging Poland, Roosevelt told Poland to declare war and to go against the Germans, not to work with them. And FDR told the French and the English that they must declare war against the Germans if Poland was invaded, and if they did not do so, we would not back them and eventually come into the war. But if they did, we would come into the war, even though he was telling the electorate that that's exactly what he was not going to do. During World War II, he and Harry Hopkins gave billions of dollars to the Soviets. And you say, well, of course, they're our allies. I had some people say this, well, they were our allies. We needed to feed them. We needed to protect them. Well, we gave them blueprints, we gave them business plans, we gave them patents, we gave them all kinds of stuff. They had whole planes full of so-called diplomatic parcels that were excluded from being checked out, that had secret information and all kinds of information about our ports and about our defenses and about our military bases. And what is worse and most telling of all is that they had access to our ongoing nuclear development at Manhattan, and Harry Hopkins was sending blueprints and insider information to the Soviets and to Stalin for the nuclear program that we had super secret in Manhattan Project. Well, how did Harry know anything about it? Because he was the liaison between the general that was overseeing the Manhattan Project and FDR. And he was also the liaison with Stalin and was the head of the Lend-Lease program as it relates to the Soviet Union. So, well, how do we know that that's what he really did? Well, because not only did he do that, but he sent essential nuclear materials from Canada, hiding them from the general that was overseeing the Manhattan Project, bringing them around through Canada, that is, concentrated uranium and other materials that would make a bomb, a nuclear bomb, and we shipped that to the Soviets before we did Nagasaki and Hiroshima. We were giving the Soviets that. So when the Rosenbergs were challenged with treason, they were just patsies. They were the Lee Harvey Oswald of the Manhattan Project. They were challenged and tried and convicted and executed, perhaps because they gave materials, although there's no indication that Ethel did, but they also had to be there to take the fall for what Harry Hopkins had done during the war to make sure that the Soviets were not behind us on the nuclear arms race. So the Cold War was facilitated and brought on and accelerated and enhanced by Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his buddy Harry Hopkins. But that's not even that's horrible. But if you take a look at Yalta and the other meetings they had, he and Churchill capitulated and gave to the Soviet Union Poland, the Baltics, the Balkans, the Eastern European states, and we half-sheeted Chiang Kai-shek and effectively set Mao up to be the communist leader in China, and we gave to the Soviets the right to establish Tito as the overseer of Yugoslavia before anybody got a vote. So all of those nations that planned on us providing them with self-determination and that we had promised them we would, we gave it to Stalin before we even ended the war. They were already toast before we ended the war. So millions of people became communist at the hands of Winston Churchill and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So these are little pieces of the truth and not truth about our existence. And what I would say to you is, to go back to my main theme, is everything's upside down. And if you want to know the truth, if you can handle the truth, you have to take that ball and turn it upside down and then begin to pull it apart with discernment and sort what might be true through all of the lies they have told us for hundreds of years. Thanks for watching. I typically lose 100 subscribers every time I do a video. I anticipate this one might be even better than that. Thanks so much for watching. Subscribe if you like it. It's always great to watch and listen to your comments, so thank you so much.